Hi, welcome to Voice of San Diego at Home. This is a special edition of Voice of San Diego at Home because I'm not at home. I'm at the office. We've got also a special edition. This isn't no Friday 5 live at 5. This is a real thing. We've got a big debate tonight between the mayoral candidates, Barbara Bree, City Councilwoman Barbara Bree, and Assemblyman Todd Gloria. But this one is all about Balboa Park. Balboa Park and the future of Balboa Park is a big part of our city, and Balboa Park is in trouble in a lot of ways, but it's obviously something we all prize and hold dear. There is a lot at stake for Balboa Park, and I'm very pleased that both candidates have joined us. This is a joint production of Voice of San Diego, the Friends of Balboa Park, and the Balboa Park Conservancy. Just a bit about Voice of San Diego. If you're not familiar, Voice of San Diego is an investigative and explanatory journalism organization. We do videos, we do investigative work online, and we do podcasts, and we all do it to make sure that you, A, understand what's happening in your city, and B, find out things that people don't want you to find out. And we are one part of this incredible local media system, and today's effort is to help you understand the future of Balboa Park and be part of it as well, so that you can be up to date on the issues. And if you care that much about Balboa Park that it'll influence your vote, well, here's a chance to differentiate the candidates. Before we get into this, like I said, this was a joint production of the Friends of Balboa Park and the Balboa Park Conservancy. They asked if I would host this debate. I agreed to it. And Betty Peabody, one of the founders of Balboa Park, Betty Peabody, I don't know anyone in San Diego who doesn't love Betty Peabody. If you don't know her, maybe you don't love her, but if you knew her, you would. She's a very special woman to a lot of us, and she asked me if I would read something on her behalf before we started this event. I got a little bit of news. Late Friday is the time to break news, but here goes. This is a statement from Betty Peabody. And it's in reference to the future of Balboa Park. And I'm just going to read it straight. October 9th, 2020. There are two large and important organizations in Balboa Park that share the same goal: to, quote, protect, preserve, and enhance Balboa Park. Many institutions have memberships and support groups, but who speaks for the trees? Or who is the voice of the park? I just added that. Sorry, Betty. Or the park as a whole. A few months ago, a founder of the Friends of Balboa Park, me, Betty Peabody, called a founder of the Balboa Park Conservancy, Carol Chang, and asked, "Do you think we have anything to talk about?" The answer was yes. On Memorial Day, a small task force began discussions, and on August 26th, a non-binding memorandum of understanding was signed with the goal of merging these two nonprofit entities into a single organization. The exploratory phase is complete, and we have entered the analysis and due diligence phase. Confidentiality agreements have been signed by all members involved. We share the excitement of the challenges and opportunities in blending the boards, staffs, and the economies of scale, as well as providing a clearer picture to Balboa Park donors. A more efficient relationship with the Park and Recreation Department, the city, and the county will produce cost savings with more funds to be directed into the park. Although we have shared work on many projects in the park, our initial public notice of collaboration is the co-sponsorship of this mayoral forum. We thank Scott Lewis and the Voice of San Diego. I didn't just add that part. That was real. We sincerely appreciate the interest and support of each of our candidates and each of you in the audience. Thank you, Betty Peabody. So big news there. I was at the press conference where they announced, I think in 2012 or 2013, the formation of the Balboa Park Conservancy as a needed management system, potentially someday to take over management of Balboa Park the way that the Central Park Conservancy does in New York City. It has never quite achieved that goal, but it has done other things. The Friends of Balboa Park, of course, has been around for a long time. So we have a very important discussion to pivot off of that announcement with our candidates for mayor. Let me introduce them. We have City Councilwoman Barbara Bree. Hello, Barbara.
Good evening, Scott.
Thanks for coming on. And we have Assemblyman Todd Gloria. Hey, Todd.
Hey, Scott.
Let's just get right into this. You guys both heard that announcement. I'm sure you've found and followed the Balboa Park Conservancy and the management issues associated with the park. I want to ask you, Todd, to start. Do you think that Balboa Park needs a private or a nonprofit or a separate management oversight for the future of the park so that it can hit its goals and deal with its dilemmas?
Yes, I do. And Scott, that announcement that you just read from my friend Betty Peabody is really important news, probably more important than anything than Councilmember Bree and I may say tonight, because it is true that we need to take the love that San Diegans have for the park, harness that for the purposes of philanthropic investment, and partner with the city to accomplish big projects. That was always the vision of the Conservancy. And as you mentioned, the Friends have been doing this for years. To combine these efforts, make that goal more achievable. It's extremely exciting news. And I would just add that this model that we're talking about is one that was validated after a long and lengthy community process back in 2007, 2008, where we've studied multiple models for management of the park. And it was deemed that the Conservancy model was the one that would best suit our purposes in San Diego. It's worked well in other communities. This is a logical next step. It's a great news day for Balboa Park and for our city.
Thank you. Barbara, same question to you. Do you think there needs to be a separate entity to take on some of this leadership and oversight role of the greater Balboa Park?
Yes, and this is something on which Todd and I agree. I think this is a great step forward. One of the issues in the park has been that there's a lot of different organizations speaking with many different voices. It's been unclear to the public and to philanthropists who speaks for the park. So let's remember, so thank you, Betty. Women have played a key role in Balboa Park. Kate Sessions started Balboa Park. She is the mother of Balboa Park. And Betty Peabody, I would say, is the current mother of Balboa Park, taking it into the next century.
Okay. Do you think, just to be clear, that that any kind of management or conservancy entity like that should have independent power over, say, how the park gets maintained, what priorities it has for funding, or should it be a sort of submissive relationship to the city? How would you try to manage that specific kind of level of authority for that future of the park? Let's start with you, Barbara.
So I don't have a specific concrete answer to that at this time. I think for sure it has to be a collaborative relationship with both the city and the county. This is a regional treasure, not just a city park. It happens to be in the city of San Diego, but people from all over the county and tourists from all over the world use Balboa Park. As mayor, I want to lead a thoughtful, strategic process on what the future of Balboa Park looks like in terms of governance, in terms of oversight, and in terms of funding.
Todd, same question to you.
Yeah. So we discussed this at length many years ago when arriving at the conclusion that a conservancy would be the best model for Balboa Park. And the vision was an experience of sort of graduated responsibility, that as the conservancy gains support and a reputation for accomplishment, that some of the responsibilities of day-to-day management could be transitioned to the conservancy. The way the Conservancy came into being in terms of the MOU or lack thereof with the city is something that continues to be a challenge. And so I think that this news that you made today, an appreciation to Betty and to Carol Chang, who's also been a great contributor to the park, particularly her leadership at the Conservancy, I think is an example of that kind of graduated responsibility. The Conservancy has been putting on December nights for several years now, a civic function that for many years, Scott, you may remember, was kind of touch and go. We didn't always know year after year whether or not that was going to happen, despite the fact that San Diegans love that event. To the extent they've brought certainty and stability to that, is one of many steps I think we could see as the city considers transitioning more responsibilities to a philanthropic partner. To the other part of your question, I think is really important, Scott. I think one of the things that the Conservancy or our nonprofit partner, I don't know what this blending of these two organizations, what name they'll end up with, and I'd hope that at some point the Committee of 100 and some of the other key park stakeholders could also join this collaborative effort. Whatever that group is, I think they could play probably a lead role in helping us to prioritize and identify projects, not just in terms of need, but matching those needs with philanthropic partners will actually help fund and execute those projects.
One of the first responses to this sort of situation always comes up is this worry about privatizing the park. You mentioned Kate Sessions. Those concerns have gone back all the way to her time when she did her own sort of privatization of the park here and there. There will always be people worried about the park being separated or privatized. What is your understanding of where the line crosses to where you wouldn't tolerate either nonprofit or commercial interests in the park using park land, Todd?
Yeah, let me be extremely clear. The park is and always will be an asset of the people of San Diego. There's no hedging, there's no footnotes, there's no additional comments or expansion. Hard stop. This commercialization cannot happen in the park. And as we engage philanthropic partners, if a individual or company or somebody wanted to make a contribution to support the park, that's great. But there will never be a Pepsi banner hanging off the side of the California Tower. There'll never be corporate logos on large ones on the sides of buildings. What I would envision is tasteful recognition of philanthropic contributions. And Scott, when you look at other conservancies across the United States, they've been able to hit, I think, a tasteful balance of recognizing those that are helping to make improvements happen without overly commercializing or creating visual pollution, if you will, in a place as special as Balboa Park. And then in terms of, I want to be specific about this as well, because I've heard this a lot from San Diegans. There was a proposal, or I guess an RFP, that the current administration floated for the potential construction of a hotel on park property. I don't believe that passes. Is not legal. The city charter would not permit that, and I certainly wouldn't support that as mayor.
Barbara, where is the line where it crosses inappropriately in privatization for you? Obviously, the nonprofits have a role in the park right now. Some commercial interests have a role in the park right now. Where does it cross the line?
Well, I think Todd made a lot of good points. Of course, we want restaurants in the park so people have a place to eat when they're visiting. So that kind of private enterprise is appropriate. I was against the effort to build a paid parking garage in Balboa Park, which I think was the wrong form of commercialization. It was a project supported by Todd when he was on the city council. And what I was concerned about was it put attention on raising philanthropic money for a parking garage, and the city was going to have to issue revenue bonds in addition, instead of focusing philanthropic and city money on maintaining the park. So I think it was a terrible distraction for a number of years. It was the wrong way to go with the park. I've been adamant that I am against commercialization in the park. When the mayor released his RFP, about wanting to build a hotel, I immediately stood up and I said that is the wrong way to go. Balboa Park is the people's park. It's for San Diegans, and it is such a precious resource that we must make sure that we maintain it for our children and our grandchildren. I took my kids there when they were growing up, and now I'm taking my grandkids there.
Todd, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that, since she mentioned your support. She was talking about the Plaza de Panama rebuild plan and the parking garage and bypass bridge that would have included. Yeah.
So, I mean, the Plaza de Panama project is dead. It is not coming back. I would not advocate for it coming back. And I think the role that strengthening the philanthropic partner, in the case of the Conservancy, the Friends, the Committee of 100, I think could help address some of the lessons learned from that experience in terms of identifying where we want to welcome philanthropy, on projects for which there is a great deal of consensus. I think that process was playing out under the leadership of Councilmember Chris Ward, as he was engaging with park stakeholders to try and identify which projects are in need of prioritization. And so I see this news again that you've made today as being the obvious solution to how to avoid the kinds of controversy we've had in the past. And lastly, Scott, I want to say part of my tenure as the council member for District 3, sort of my philosophy or orientation of what I tried to do in Balboa Park was to expand access in the park. And we did that in any number of ways, by providing free public Wi-Fi throughout the park, by encouraging cultural institutions to put their offerings in multiple languages, and yes, trying to expand the amount of parking in the park. We worked hard to get a rapid bus line down Park Boulevard in order to make the park more transit accessible. We added bike corrals in the park in order to make biking more attractive. But Scott, I think you probably know, whenever you may want to take your children to the park, it is often a challenge. And increasing parking in the park was a means of trying to increase access to the park, this civic asset, this taxpayer-funded asset that every San Diegan should have access to.
So you both mentioned that you are against that effort, that you were hostile to the idea of renting out part of the park. But part of the reason for that was to emulate some of the success that Mission Bay Park has had in raising money for its own infrastructure, for its own upkeep, for its own future. And that was the motivation, at least nominally, by the mayor and the supporters of that idea of some bit of commercial activity on that part of the park. It's widely acknowledged Balboa Park lacks sufficient resources to support critical infrastructure, ongoing maintenance, and a lot of that is due to a lack of specific funding for Balboa Park. How would you address that lack of dedicated, meaningful, sustainable funding that they feel is necessary for the park to meet its needs? Barbara?
Yes. So, Scott, I think it starts with having the park speak with one voice, which the merger of these two important organizations is a good first step. But I think there needs to be more efforts to consolidate other organizations in the park so that the park speaks with one voice. Second, similar to what the Central Park Conservancy does, I think we can improve what we do with philanthropy. First, by focusing on the businesses and the residents who surround the park. And there are a lot of nice new condos being built on Bankers Hill. I think that there are a lot of people who would like to support the park in a formal way once they understand that there's sort of a unified governance structure and they understand what their money would be used for. We can't create a maintenance assessment district in the park or a business improvement district in the park because there are no voters living in the park to pay those assessment fees. But essentially, we can leverage what surrounds the park to start getting a specific revenue stream to the park.
Would you ever support actually a dedicated new tax, a bond, maybe as part of a larger infrastructure or parks bond for the region?
So I'm looking first to see what happens with Measure C, if it's found legal or not, which was passed in the primary, and we're not quite sure if it's legal, because if it's legal, it will provide money to the city general fund for homelessness and infrastructure, which would free up other money for other purposes, such as Balboa Park. And if it's not found legal, then there's things going forward that we could consider depending on how the economy looks.
All right, Todd, same question at you. How would you address that lack of sort of dedicated funding, sustainable funding for the deferred and future needs of the park?
Yeah, I think there's a multitude of strategies that we could employ. The park provides a lot of opportunities that other city assets don't have. Scott, for the many years I've been honored to represent Balboa Park, I would often try and explain the value and importance of the Conservancy model by asking audiences I would speak in front of, show of hands, how many of you all love Balboa Park? And every hand in the room invariably would go up. And then ask, show of hands, how many of you all would personally contribute to improve and maintain the park? Consistently, every hand would stay up. Mm-hmm. Then you ask the question, how many of you all would write that check to the city of San Diego? Most hands, 90+% of hands would go down. But when you ask them if they make that contribution to a philanthropic nonprofit partner with tax exempt status, most hands remained up. So the point I'm trying to make is that there is a marketplace for philanthropy to help address many of the needs in Balboa Park. You talked about a predictable funding source, and I frankly think that the size and the scale, it doesn't involve just those who are blessed to live near Balboa Park. That's citywide. People love this institution and they are willing to support it, whether it's informally through philanthropy or through the additional direct contributions. Here's another strategy I think is important. Last year in our state budget, I was able to work with Senator Tony Atkins to get over $8 million in funding for Balboa Park to restore our botanical building, as well as to expand the international cottages. And I think that I would like to take the experiences I have working both in Sacramento and as a legislative staffer for Congress to try and bring those to make sure that we're getting every nickel that we can possibly get to support the park. And then lastly, much like Councilmember Bree, we have a lack of clarity on the outcome of Measure C. If we are in a position where we must go back to the voters in order to expand our convention center, which I think is a civic priority, a reformulated proposal that would be inclusive of investments in tourism serving infrastructure like Balboa Park, like our beaches and bays and piers, I think would be a reasonable proposal that San Diegans would embrace.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, what you're saying is that you would, if Measure C is finally knocked off, it didn't quite get 2/3, but there is a legal argument that it could survive and be implemented. That was the increase to the hotel room tax that was on the March ballot. You're saying if that does finally die, that you would want to put a new hotel room tax up that would be inclusive of infrastructure for the entire tourism world, which would include Balboa Park?
So yes, but let me be specific. I am rooting for Measure C, and I believe that there's a strong case to be made that it'll pass. But I think a leader has to have a plan B. And Scott, the second point I want to make, expanding our convention center is critical for our regional economy. And so as your mayor, I would have the responsibility to have a plan B ready to go. And I think that perhaps the additional, we only came less than 2% short of what was necessary to clear the already admittedly high bar for passage. If we explain to people that this is going to improve your neighborhood, and since that love that I was talking about a moment ago for Balboa Park, that you could harness that to help pass this measure, that you could see the deferred maintenance that is also in Mission Bay and get that addressed, to deal with the seawall issues, the piers, and all the other visitor serving accommodations that San Diegans would actually understand it would also benefit them. That's a reasonable idea that I think we could get broad support for, both from residents and from the hospitality industry that would understand the nexus to their business.
Let's talk. You guys talked about, or Barbara brought up, the Plaza de Panama restoration, the whole effort that fizzled. That began when Mayor Jerry Sanders at the time went to Irwin Jacobs, the co-founder of Qualcomm, and asked for support for a smaller version of that effort. They cooked up a much broader idea. It did get support, but it was obviously caused a lot of controversy, contention. And then I think Dr. Jacobs and a bunch of other philanthropists felt like it really went poorly as far as being accepted by the city, but then being rejected ultimately. And I guess that brings up a big question about the role of philanthropists in the park. What is their role? How would you, assure them that the things you try to sell them on get in or work, or that they have a role, or do they not have a role? Is it inappropriate? Barbara, do you feel like it was inappropriate?
Well, first of all, I was still, just in the private sector when this was all going on. And, Irwin Jacobs has been one of the most important people in San Diego, starting a company that, employs thousands of people, being enormously generous in all segments of our community. But I think what was missing in this is it should have been sort of a bottom up. Here are the priorities in Balboa Park, that's why it's so important that there be an organization that truly speaks for the park with one voice. So they will tell it, and they will be working with the community and the city. So when they put together their top 10 list, it's clear that a wide group of people agree on this. And then you ask philanthropists to come in and help, fund these projects instead of the philanthropists dictating what they want. So that I think it has to be a more collaborative process. And I think, and I watched one of the city hearings where I think Irwin was treated really badly by Bob Filner, who, staged a show when he came to the city council with a woman dressed up as Kate Sessions. And I think that was terrible. But I think I fault Jerry Sanders and the council at the time for not understanding that this wasn't the right process and they put Irwin in a very difficult place.
Is that true, Todd? Do you feel like it was a bad process?
Well, we had a lengthy process, and let's be clear, there were many supporters of the project. I would absolutely agree. It's a cautionary tale about philanthropy in the sense that I think it has served as a chilling effect on philanthropy since then. That individuals who could make a substantial contribution to the park look at the treatment of Dr. Jacobs and Joan Jacobs and think, I don't want anything to do with that. And again, I hate to keep going back to the news that you broke at the beginning of this conversation, Scott, but I think that that's encouraging in the sense that it could help us to reset the conversation about philanthropy in Balboa Park, to create processes that would give donors assurance that we wouldn't have a replay of that situation. What happened in that circumstance, I think, was a desire to make a major improvement in the park, to think a bit bigger. And Scott, you've heard me talk about for a very long time that too often in our city, we're a big city that operates like a small town. And while the more modest improvements in the Plaza de Panama are an obvious improvement that everyone likes, there was an idea to try and go bigger, to address issues about ADA accessibility, to address the sometimes lack of parking, particularly at peak hours, and to try and fully pedestrianize the central heart of the park. And those were, I think, were all worthy objectives that were supported by many of the park stakeholders who are viewing this right now, because they see the inherent value in it. To the extent that there were groups of San Diegans who didn't feel comfortable with that, and the project ultimately was not successful, I think it's in all of our benefits to learn from that experience, set that aside, and move forward with stuff for which there is great consensus. The truth of the matter is there's probably over $300 million in projects that need funding in Balboa Park. There's plenty that we can engage with the philanthropic sector, but it starts in resetting this conversation and showing that future philanthropists will not have to endure what the Jacobs had to endure.
Yeah. And Scott, I'd like to add, at the same time or at a similar time frame as that was happening, there was a lot of disappointment over the failed centennial celebration. So, the public was told this will be a magnificent celebration. We won't just have a sheet cake from Costco. But at the end, we didn't even get a sheet cake from Costco. So I think the combination of that fizzling out and the issue with the parking garage has set the park back. But I think, this is a new day. There's going to be a new mayor. As mayor, I want to be, a voice for the park, someone who's, been using the park, for the 40 years that I've lived here with my children and now my grandchildren in many different ways. I mean, going to museums, going to the Old Globe Theater, just taking my kids on a Sunday to walk around and go visit all the different houses and to, actually, I did let them go in the fountain, so and to go into the fountain.
When you looked at what happened, we did a big dissection for Voice San Diego about why that celebration effort fell apart. A lot of it had to do with the mayor himself and his own, weird. This was Bob Filner at the time.
Yes.
His ambitions and his style was a little awkward at that moment. But what would you have done to brought that home? Like, what kind of celebration or what kind of organization needed to be in place to bring that home?
I think you could have done something on a much simpler basis, using the existing organizations in the park to plan it. I wouldn't have seen the need to set up this separate fancy committee and pay very high salaries to people. You didn't need to do that to put on a good centennial celebration.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Todd?
How much time do we have, Scott? It's always easy to throw stones from the cheap seats, particularly when you weren't involved or helping in the situation. And Scott, you're right. We had a situation where we had basically 4 mayors have to be involved in the planning of this thing, and we had I thought, well thought out strategy for what we wanted to do, and then we had a new mayor come in and throw it all out and said we're going to invite foreign leaders and sheikhs and dignitaries and private jets and the whole nine. And as you might remember, we were feuding over a few other issues at the time, it felt to me, but I'm frustrated by the description by my opponent, because clearly she didn't participate in what did happen in the Centennial, which in many cases I think was quite lovely. We had citizen volunteers come forward and put on numerous things, adopt-a plots to help improve some of the gardens throughout Balboa Park. We had wagon parades and philanthropic investments, and it ended up being something quite charming. We had a New Year's Eve concert in Spreckles Organ Pavilion. I remember it because I think it was like 35 degrees that night, and I was sitting next to Mr. Spreckles' grandson, who was advanced age, but we were out there in that cold weather. A lot still happened. It wasn't necessarily what we started out thinking we could do, but ultimately I think it actually was a lovely celebration that helped have groups like the Conservancy who participated, the Friends and others, to do something that was lovely. But Scott, I'm always going to be someone that believes that we should try harder and do bigger. In this particular case, I think this is actually a cautionary tale about who we elect as mayor, and whose mayor matters. And it does have real impacts on projects like this one.
We mentioned philanthropists. We mentioned potential new taxes. We mentioned a lot about some potential funding. There was an idea before the pandemic that maybe the county of San Diego should have a much broader role within this. And I'm talking about the actual government, the county of San Diego. It is a regional asset. It's unfortunate that the burden of it has fallen largely on the city of San Diego. Should the county take a more active role in both governance and funding, or the city doing just fine, needs to take care of its own business? County and city don't really get along on some things. Stay out of our business. Todd?
Well, Scott, it's going to take a political change at 1600 Pacific Highway. And we may get that. We may get a board that is, I think, more interested in making those kinds of investments. But I also want to just acknowledge that the county does make some investments. Through community enhancement grants and other things, they have made some contributions to individual institutions. As mayor, I would welcome more investment in the park, recognizing the regional nature of that of this asset. But I think that if we were going to ask the county to step up on anything in the near-term future, I would ask them to step up when it comes to homelessness. And actually, that would have direct benefits to Balboa Park, because I know that we have a homelessness crisis in the park as well as the city as a whole. So, I'm maybe pessimistic about whether or not the county would ever take on additional responsibilities where this is concerned. I want to pay respects to what they already do. But I would say if we're going to see political change that allows for more investment by the county, let's focus it on homelessness and mental illness.
Just a break real quick. If you are out there, one of the few hundred people watching this, you have a question, put it in there. I might not get to many of them, but we can also follow up on it. We did just post, don't leave yet, but we did just post a story about the merger of the Friends of Balboa Park and the Balboa Park Conservancy. You can look at it after this. I know you're dying to go to thevoiceofsandiego.org to see that and much more of our impressive explanatory investigative work, but just hold off for now. Barbara, does the county have a major role in either governance or funding that they're not playing in the park and should be?
So I think Todd makes a very good point. Homelessness is a serious issue in the park, and it's very costly to the city in terms of extra security, cleaning the bathrooms 24 hours a day. So having the county put more focus on homelessness is going to help the city relieve financial pressure on the city. But there is another model that could be considered. So I sit on the board of what's called the San Diego River Park, which is a joint powers authority. Parts of the San Diego River Park are in the city of San Diego. Some is in Encinitas. Escondido, Solana Beach, Del Mar. So representatives of and the unincorporated areas of the county. So representatives of all these areas sit on this joint powers authority, and it has been an effective governance structure over the years. Then separate from this government board is a philanthropy, the San Diego Park Conservancy, so similar to the Balboa Park Conservancy. And the two organizations have worked well together, with one raising money and the other kind of running the operations of the river park. So I think that is a model, and the county does contribute to that, although some of that land is actually in the county, in contrast with Balboa Park, where all the land is in the city of San Diego.
Okay.
If I can,
Sure.
Again, this is where experience and knowledge is important. A JPA was considered by the community back in 07, 08, and was excluded. That was not what the community came to conclude was best for Balboa Park. And so rehashing that conversation is just a continuation of a San Diego special where we talk about the same things over and over again and never get anything done. We had an inclusive community process that identified the conservancy model. We've made great news tonight that this is going to likely get stronger, and we should be continuing on our path. If the county wants to help support more, that's fantastic. But blowing up governance in Balboa Park to start over from scratch, I think would set back and would disrespect the work that so many people have been doing for the last 9 years through the Conservancy.
Barbara, do you want to respond to that? Were you aware of those talks about the JPA before that?
Yes, but that was a long time ago. The world has changed a lot, and I'm not saying I advocate for it. I'm just saying it is a possible model.
Okay. Let's talk about some more specific things that have come up, and some of the questions have talked about that. There's been in the news recently, a few days ago, restaurateur David Cohn talked about an idea to activate the Plaza de Panama a little bit with a Ferris wheel. Seems like we get an idea for a Ferris wheel around somewhere in San Diego every few years. But I think they're at the heart of it is a concern that we need to activate some of this area a little bit more. There's a lot of places really suffering. I think that we heard from some institutions during the height of the pandemic that their revenue was down almost 100%. I remember Lisa Halverstadt told me that one of the institutions was facing 98% revenue loss, and I asked her to double check that. That didn't seem possible, but it was. A lot of institutions are suffering. They want to see some life, but there's also, some public health challenges and such. Do you support that kind of activation of the park, and where else might it occur, Barbara?
So I do not support a Ferris wheel in the park. That is not the type of commercial. I think that is very inappropriate, and it's a commercial venture. I think that the new Seaport Village down by the waterfront is planning something similar, or a giant tower that you can go up in. And I think, that's a whole different place, not a park. And I think, something like that could be very appropriate there. I think what's most important now for the institutions is we get through the coronavirus pandemic, and that they get to open safely at full capacity. And that's the most important thing we can do for their future health.
Todd?
Yeah, Scott, all I know is what I've read in the media about this proposal. So, just with that caveat, no, I would struggle with supporting this proposal. It seems like not the right location, and may seem eerily similar to recent mistakes that were made in the park. What I would say is that there are a multitude of ways to activate Balboa Park to invite folks in. I understand the benefits of having folks outdoors. We understand that risk is less there. There's obviously tons of space. You could space people out. I get all of that. But one of the things I did when I was on the city council was to help launch Food Truck Fridays, which was a home run, right? And when you'd go out on a Friday night and see families in the Prado, you recognize it doesn't take a major investment. It doesn't take something static placed for full time in the plaza or along the Prado to welcome people in. And it would just seem to me that there's probably less costly, less intrusive ways to activate that space at a time when we need to help support these institutions. I'd also point out that there's other ways for the city to support our cultural institutions in Balboa Park at this difficult time. I would point out that many of them need leases either extended or created. In the case of the World Beat Center, they've been without a lease for so long, and I think that is absolutely unacceptable. And the city could provide that level of certainty that a long-term lease would provide to help support those organizations. I think that as we do those leases, making sure that they are financially beneficial to the institutions. The idea of trying to claw more money out of institutions at a time when they have very little in their coffers doesn't make sense either. So I guess what I'm saying is there are, I think, more impactful to the institutions, but less so to the park, ways to activate our Central Plaza at a time when it needs it.
Was there something there you wanted to respond to, Barbara?
No, I wanted to tell Todd that I thought Food Truck Friday was a great idea, and I used to go. I don't know if it's happening right now during the pandemic, but it really was a great thing in terms of activating the park. And I agree, there are a lot of creative things we can do that cost very little money to encourage more people to come.
Look at all this good cheer between you. This warms my heart. All right, let's ask another question. The submissions that came into the Friends and the Conservancy had a thing that's been on my mind for a long time about the park. It is kind of a maze. I remember when they formed the Balboa Park Conservancy years ago, one of its main things was going to be to try to help people just navigate the park. You may think that there's no parking, but there could be plenty of parking at Inspiration Point. You may think that there's nowhere to go, but there's plenty of places to go. You may not know where you are at any given moment. The traffic can be, the intersection between pedestrians and vehicles can be a little gnarly in some spots. It is quite a place. We were just there for a little bit of an engagement ourselves, and it doesn't seem like it's changed much. What would you do to address specifically traffic, parking, and getting around accessibly in the park, Todd?
Well, this ain't rocket science. This is done in many places, and I think it's really critical for improving the visitor experience that we do this stuff. Scott, you're right. I mean, over the last 12 years, I've been in the park thousands and thousands of times, and I don't think there's too many times I don't go where I don't encounter somebody who is lost, right, and who is struggling to find parking or find their way. Wayfinding signage exists in the park currently. It could certainly be improved. Parking and where parking is available, we know that obviously the Alcazar parking lot is. If you find a space there, buy a lotto ticket because you're lucky. Whereas like the Federal lot, behind the Starlight is often underutilized. And of course, Inspiration Point continues to be a place where there's a large reservoir of parking. We see parking systems now that very clearly identify where the spaces are. When you go to a mall now, you can see that pretty commonly. And I think that there's a way that we can do this. I think particularly shuttles need to, the shuttle that we have going or had been going, it's not happening right now during the pandemic, needs to service more of the park, certainly the west side as well. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the last piece, and Scott, you said something that is foremost in my mind, particularly as your mayor, safety is important. And when I watch what happens at Park and President's Way, certainly in the Plaza de Panama, sometimes right there in front of the cottages in the Palisades area, there are real safety concerns that I observe. And again, that is not helpful to the visitor experience. The city really should prioritize trying to address that. And this could be a reasonable project that our nonprofit partner could help prioritize, fund, and execute as a near-term project with high impact in terms of improving people's experience when they go to Balboa Park.
Barbara?
Yeah, so I would summarize what Todd said. Better signage that tells you, so if you've ever been to UCSD, where I worked for 10 years, it's very confusing, similar to Balboa Park on where you are, because there's no streets, it's not like downtown, where you've got A Street and Fifth Avenue, and it's all very organized. I mean, Balboa Park is not organized, neither are most university campuses. So better signage, both about where you are and what's near you at that moment in time, and better information about parking and where parking is available. I mean, I never even try to park in Alcazar Gardens. I park behind the old Federal building where a Comic-Con is opening up, or I park at Inspiration Point, I'm able to walk. I always view it as good exercise to, even if I'm going to the Old Globe, it's, a good excuse to get some steps in. But I know not everyone can, and that's why I think the shuttle system is particularly important.
All right, let's talk about some of these comments that have come up. I believe this one hits on something I wanted to address too. Going over cobblestones in a wheelchair sucks, and most of the pathways are not ADA friendly. One of the primary goals of the Plaza de Panama plan was to make it a lot easier for folks to get in and out of the park, especially older folks or people with disabilities. I want to ask the candidates to address that, in particular accessibility for people who can't easily drive in and park and walk a distance. Todd?
Well, I think I've tried to, at least in a couple other answers earlier this evening, to do that. Scott, you're right. I mean, one of the things as the council member for District 3 that was important to me in the Plaza de Panama project was that it was going to be a very significant investment in bringing the park into ADA compliance. Obviously, the park, portions of it are 105 years old, and they didn't have the Americans with Disabilities Act back then, and we have an obligation to make the park fully accessible. Again, my operating philosophy for what the city should do is make it more accessible in the literal sense in this term, but also for technology, language, and mobility. The shuttle becomes really important, particularly as we pedestrianize more areas. I'm very supportive of the pedestrianization that's happened in the Plaza de Panama. I'm supportive of pedestrianizing the Palisades and glad to see that project moving forward. As we do more of that, we're going to have more mobility options. And the very loud green-looking monster shuttle, again, should be working in more than just the southeast quadrant or so of the Central Mesa. It should service the Western Mesa and should service more of that. And these were solutions we put forward previously. They weren't successful. Failure is not a reason to stop working at it. You got to come back and be persistent. We should be persistent in addressing this need to make the park more accessible for everybody, including those who are differently able.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so I'll just add on to what Todd said. As mayor, what I want to do is work with the Conservancy and the community to set priorities. So if we need to make the park more accessible, which parts are particularly not accessible now? Which are the most important ones to address first? Understanding that we can't do everything at one time. So it's important to set priorities with deadlines and then hold people accountable. And that's what I've seen at City Hall too often with everything, is that things just drag on and no one sort of gets it done, and everybody figures out a way to say no, and there isn't sort of a sense of urgency about getting anything done. And I was in the private sector for many years before running for public office, and there is a higher sense of urgency, I think some of which is appropriate at City Hall.
Okay, let's take a couple of more of these points. I've been getting texts and messages. Sorry, I forgot about this. There is new signage coming to the park, a new wayfinding program next year. Keep that in mind. So that will be addressed in part. Thank you, Balboa Park Conservancy, for reminding me about that. And I look forward to it. It is kind of gnarly right now. All right, let's look at for some of these other questions. There was one about the Starlight Bowl and about the Palisades area. A lot of talk about trying to activate that more, trying to, without, privatizing and commercializing too much. How is that possible? A lot of people have fond memories of Starlight Bowl. And for years, since we revealed how dilapidated a state it had been in, I don't know, it was like 7 or 8 years ago, it's not changed much. Todd?
Yeah, well, there's a multitude of strategies that we could employ to activate the Palisades. Under Chris Ward's leadership, they're moving forward with a reclamation of a portion of that parking lot. Right now, there's not a lot of reasons to hang out in that area unless you're intending to go to one of the institutions that are in the Palisades. And I think this will change that much in the way the Plaza de Panama used to be something that you would, get through as quickly as possible because nothing to see there. Instead, now you see people treating it as essentially the living room of the park, right? I think something similar will happen as that reclamation process in the Palisades happen. I think the Comic-Con Museum is going to be transformational for the Palisades, and I'm so excited about that and adding that institution to the already stellar lineup of institutions in Balboa Park. It's going to be, I have every confidence, an absolute home run. And my hope would be that additional attention, that additional foot traffic, the lingering that would happen in what is currently a parking lot, but instead would be a public plaza, would encourage the forward movement that's going to be necessary to find a new life for the Starlight Bowl. Back when I was on the city council, I want to express appreciation to former councilmember Lori Zaff. She and I partnered together to use some discretionary funds to fund a study for how we could bring the Starlight Bowl back into useful life. It doesn't have a small price tag, but groups like Save Starlight are committed volunteers who are willing to do this. So I think that there's actually some pretty bright days ahead for the Palisades section. And what it takes is having, again, the city that is purposeful and moving forward, inviting private sector partners to help us do it, and we will get it done. But the reclamation, the new Comic-Con Museum, a restoration of the Starlight, I think some good stuff's going to happen in that corner of the park.
Barbara, the Palisades and the Starlight Bowl area?
Yeah, so I think the Palisades project is an example of doing things the right way. I was at a meeting in Balboa Park about a year and a half ago on a very hot summer night at which a committee was discussing the Palisades project and whether the city should move forward. And on this hot summer night, about 100 people showed up to crowd into what seemed like a small room because they were really excited about this project and they understood that it really could activate that part of the park. And now, I haven't been to the park in a while now because of the pandemic, but I understand it's about done and I'm looking forward to seeing it. I got to go to the Comic-Con Museum when it briefly opened for a few days during Comic-Con with some temporary exhibits. And it truly is going to activate that part of the park. I mean, it's going to have a restaurant that's open late. It's going to be open, till midnight on Fridays and Saturdays, not normal museum hours, but hours that people can attend because many people work during the day. So I think it's going to, bring more people to the park and bring more people to that end of the park. I hope that the Starlight is successful. I mean, to have another theater in the park would be fantastic. We've got the Old Globe, we've got Junior Theater. To also have the Starlight doing musicals would be fantastic.
All right, let's look. There's all the institutions in the park, and then there's the zoo. The zoo is a almost separate planet within the solar system, and maybe a separate sun. There is a couple of questions about the zoo. One says, would you support changing the tax that goes to the zoo? It is built into the city charter, is my understanding. It's not going to be easily changed. But there is often a concern that the zoo is not part of the greater park discussion, does its own things, and does not need that kind of public tax subsidy that it gets every year. What is the proper role of the zoo, and does it need to change, Barbara?
First of all, the San Diego Zoo is world famous. It attracts tourists who some come to San Diego just to go to the zoo. And many tourists visit the zoo as well as, all of us. I've been going to the zoo for 40 years. One of the first presents I got for my first grandson was, a junior membership to the zoo. So I think the zoo is a really important organization. And what I look forward going forward is closer collaboration between the zoo and the rest of the park. So when someone visits the zoo, they also understand, well, there's a whole other part of the park. I can go to the Aerospace Museum. I can go to the Museum of Man. I can go to the Fleet. So that there's a whole lot of other things and vice versa. So that their people are going back and forth more often. And so, there's people park at the zoo and often they don't know how to get to the rest of Balboa Park. And so I think it's important that we do a better job of sort of bringing the zoo into the conversation of what Balboa Park's going to look like going forward.
Todd, do we need to readjust our relationship with the zoo?
I think we can always ask the zoo to do more. And during my time on the council, we try to do that, but I think we can do more still. I think Barbara's right. It is common for people to not realize when going to the zoo that there's this other incredible world-class collection of cultural institutions and gardens and other amazing things just on the other side of the hedge. And so when they improved the pedestrian connection between the zoo and Balboa Park, that was good, but that is merely one step in my mind. I think that the zoo could play a bigger role, but I do want to point out that the zoo is a leaseholder in Balboa Park. It has that contractual relationship with the city, and that the animals and the plants in the park belong to the people of San Diego. And so we do have an obligation to maintain them. But I think the zoo's success gives them a position to help support the broader park. I think it's in the interest of the zoo to do that. And at least from my conversations over the years with the zoo, there's always was a willingness or an interest to consider those proposals. I think we would all do better with a Balboa Park and a zoo that are more closely aligned, since they are in the same piece of real estate.
We're coming up on an hour. Do you guys have a little bit more time for a couple questions, or should we? It's put you in a tough situation. You want to be like, no, but you can tell me for real. Like,
I have a 6 o'clock commitment.
All right, fair enough. Understood. Then let's end on this 1 minute each. I want to bring up this question. This is full disclosure from one of my board members, but it's a really good point. Like, do you have just a grand vision for the park? You know, what it feels like, what it should be, and how do you actually go about building and making that happen? What should the park in general be? In 4 years after your first term in mayor, how would you pull that off? I think that's a good one to end on. Barbara?
Balboa Park is the people's park. It's for San Diegans and tourists of all ages. It's for babies. It's for toddlers. It's for teenagers. It's for young professionals. It's for moms and dads. It's for grandmas like me. It's for everybody, because there's something all of us can find something in the park that resonates for us. And after being mayor for 4 years, here's what I hope will happen: that we will have a unified voice for the park, that we will have identified a revenue stream for the park, that we will have done a much better job bringing meaningful philanthropy to fund a list of priorities in the park. And I think this can happen. As you noted, Scott, when you ask people if they love Balboa Park, if they will contribute to Balboa Park, they all raise their hand. We just have to give them the format and the way to do it in a way that they trust that their money will be well spent.
Todd?
So I think our vision has to be for a world-class experience in the park, not just for visitors, but for San Diegans. And that starts with better maintaining the existing incredible assets that are in the park, making sure that trees are trimmed, that the gardens are maintained. And I want to give a shout out to our city's park and rec employees who do a magnificent job with limited resources. I think they would like to do better, and we should be working to make sure they can do that. The park should be clean. It should be well lit. It should feel safe for folks to come. And then when you create that atmosphere, I believe you'll create a better visitor experience. Going forward, we should be inviting philanthropy to come and do everything from restoration of historic ornamentation that may be lost to reactivating parts of the park, like the Starlight Bowl and other places, to make it more useful. And then we should have a vision for going bigger and going bolder than that. We've talked a lot about the Central Mesa, but of course there are the assets on the West Mesa that are so important to the community of Bankers Hill and broader San Diego community. Anyone who loves volleyball probably plays volleyball there. And then importantly to the East Mesa and the Arizona landfill, which basically in my mind leaves the park almost half done. We should work at trying to make better connections between Balboa Park and downtown. As downtown continues to add residents, it's going to be important that we have that direct connection to Balboa Park. And of course, we have to continue to work to find a permanent funding source. I think that we'll have a number of opportunities over the next few years to do that. But I think it starts with making sure that the parking lots are paved, that the area is well lit, that we're addressing the homelessness encampments that are in the park. We're creating a wonderful visitor experience that causes more people to come back again. If they believe that the park is wonderful and they want to come back again and again, they will invest in the park. And that's how we'll harness the power of philanthropy to get more positive things done for our city's crown jewel.
Okay. Well, great conversation. A lot of people saying it's nice to see a civil debate. This was a constructive discussion.
And no flies.
and no flies on anybody's faces. That was a nice benefit, yes. All right. Thank you, Councilwoman Barbara Bree and Assemblyman Todd Gloria. The ballots are out. Let's get voted. I have to go finish my own politics report. And so I wanted to just remind you, if you care about these kinds of issues, you should care about Voice of San Diego. Get the morning report every weekday. Get the North County report every other Wednesday. Politics report that comes out every Saturday. What we learned every Sunday. Sacramento report. This is how you follow these conversations in San Diego. Go to voiceofsandiego.org and sign up. And if you do already like what we do and you're not a donor, not a member, and you can be, I don't want you to feel that bad, but you probably should. Obviously, everybody's strained, and if you can't, then sign up, and we'll make sure you're part of our engagements no matter what. Thank you so much for coming, and both to Todd Gloria and to Barbara Bree. I know it's hard to run for these seats and go through all this effort. It's going to be a hard month. Thank you for caring about our city and wanting to do that. Have a good weekend, and